And while oil seems to be well at the RIC, all doesn't seem to go down well with the United States. Barney Chitran Metra, PE investor and managing partner, Chrysalis Equity Ventures, joins me this morning along with Mithali Nikore, founder and chief economist, Nikore Associates. Mithali, Barney, thank you so much. It's a pleasure having you here on News 9. Mithali, let me begin by asking you, the last 72 hours and the sharp criticism that continues from the US, what is your read on the rise of RIC?
So I think this is very amusing, Karthik. I think, to be very honest, we all expected that President Trump would be irked when he saw these images, and he has been sufficiently irked, and therefore he's asked his team to make these personal attacks on, on Prime Minister Modi, which are very regrettable. Because at the end of the day, when we look at, the relationship that Prime Minister Modi had cultivated with President Trump. And in many cases, President Trump had always alluded to the fact that this relationship, despite being strong, he was putting tariffs despite the respect he had for Prime Minister Modi. He had always refrained from criticizing the Prime Minister. But now I think the gloves are off, and Peter Navarro's statements are really regrettable. So honestly, it will take a lot more work to repair this relationship between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi in some ways. But of course, I think what Prime Minister Modi has shown with his presence at the SCO and with the rise of what a lot of people in the geopolitical circles are calling the RIC is that he is willing to put in the work that is required to further the interests of India and India's people. Because in this instance, he understands, of course, Russia and India have always been, in the words of the Chinese premier, ironclad friends. But, Russia and India have taken that foundation, and Russia is sort of ushering in this era of bringing India and China together. That is true statesmanship, and that is true leadership in some ways. So which would have ideally been expected from the US. So I do think that there are a lot of changes brewing. At the same time, all of this needs to be taken with a pinch of salt, because we know that only time will tell whether we can truly trust these new relationships that are forming.
Yeah, absolutely, Barnik. That's an important point that Mithali left her answer with, that only time will tell how strong these relations that are now getting forged, at least publicly, are going to be. So, desperate times, desperate measures, one would call it, or do you see a larger diplomatic as well as economic play here with the coming together of Russia, India and China?
So, I think there is obviously a larger geopolitical play here, because the tariffs on India are not just a function of economic trade and bilateralism. I think there has been lots of geopolitical undercurrents. That being said, I think it's too early to call this a firm bloc in terms of an RIC bloc. India and China relations have not been good. Even if you look at the people who showed up at the SCO, India doesn't have the best relationships with 2 or 3 other countries there. So I think it's cautious times for India to evaluate its relationship with China. We should proceed with caution, as we've had a history of being betrayed by trusting the Chinese too much. But that being said, I think 2.8 billion people, we have to learn how to coexist. We have to learn how to cooperate. And as President Xi Jinping said, I think that elephant and dragon should dance together and work together. So I'm cautiously optimistic that something is in the works, or something may happen, which is good in the longer term, but it's too early to call this a firm alliance or a firm bloc, particularly the India-China angle.
Fair enough. Mithali, now let's bring US back into this equation, and the fact that it was expected that images going viral like the kinds that we are seeing on our screen as well are likely to irk Donald Trump, and irk they have. But the sharp criticism coming from Peter Navarro, coming from Scott Bessent yet again, and this time the attacks getting personal. So at one level, does it show desperation on the side of US to quickly go and stitch up a trade deal? Because Donald Trump has also gone ahead and posted on Truth Social that India has offered what he claims pretty much nothing, zero tariff regime into US goods coming into India. So these personal attacks, this constant sort of, egging India on and really trying to make a statement against India, is this in a desperate bid to get India back on the table? Is India that indispensable for the US? Or is this just frustration playing out publicly?
No, absolutely, Karthik. I think, every time Peter Navarro says, oh, why is he? And when he says he, he's of course referring to Prime Minister Modi in a way that is highly disrespectful, speaks to Putin, etc., and he makes these comments. I would like to remind the US administration that just 15 days ago, the US president met with President Putin in a bid to, of course, de escalate the Russia Ukraine crisis, but also they had other discussions. And the US continues to import raw material for its own nuclear plants. It continues to import several varieties of fertilizers from Russia. It continues to trade with Russia. So the US is allowed to maintain its relationship with Russia, whatever shape or form that may take, but India isn't. Why is that? I mean, again, India is not a vassal state of any country, and that is something that really needs to be drilled down into the minds of people like Peter Navarro, who are coming out and really just criticizing our actions without realizing that we're a sovereign country. So, I mean, definitely it is irking the administration that they could not push India into a corner, that they could not get India to open up its agricultural markets. They could not get India to agree to their terms, because India only negotiates as per the terms that would be viable for our farmers, for our poorest, for our marginalized. We may be a poor country compared to the US, but at the same time, we know that we are the fastest growing economy in the world. So, of course, India would be economically indispensable for any economy that seeks to sustain in the West.
All right, but Barnick, some would argue that even Donald Trump is acting in the best interest of his own constituencies, in the interest of US citizens. But again, coming back to the moot point, and that happens to be trade talks, which have now stalled. There's no guarantee and there's no surety on whether and when, if the trade talks are going to resume. So what is the way forward from here? How do you see it? Are we now stuck, locked in this 50% tariff, or do you see over time there is going to be coming back on the table, there is going to be some sort of a give and take, and India will have to wiggle its way out of this 50% tariff and try and mend ties with the US, even though at one level it is showing its defiance by, in some measures, being overtly friendly, at least visually, optically, to Russia and China?
I think, Karthik, the ball is fairly and clearly in the courts of the US, right? In the hands of the US. To be fair, we should not take too much of what Peter Navarro is saying at face value, because I think he doesn't have a formal role in the administration other than being an advisor. I think Scott Bessent's comments are, I think, far more indicative of where the US administration is. I think he has signaled the intent of doing a deal. I think, to be fair, I think the onus of getting a deal done rests more with the US than with India. I think a lot of the unilateral actions taken by the US, and let me stress on the word unilateral, right, have been taken with other considerations in mind, right? Whether they be the upcoming Russia summit, or even if you'll follow the New York Times reporting over the last couple of weeks, it's the reluctance of India to give credit to the US for reducing the tensions in May. So there are many other variables at play. I think the Indian side is always ready to negotiate. I think it's up to the Americans as to when do they want to strike a deal which would be fair to both sides, given India's red lines have always been clear on agriculture and GMO. With that in mind, there were rumors that there was a trade framework which was nearly agreed last month. But then, as I said, all the actions over the last 30, 45 days have been solely unilateral by the US. So it's completely up to the Americans when they really want to come back to the table and negotiate something which is free and fair. But I do expect, with a lot of other geopolitical issues sorting itself out or not over the next quarter, maybe people will be back at the negotiating table and there may be a framework maybe in a quarter or two.
All right, Barnik, Chitran Metra, Mithali Nekore, thank you so much for your time this morning. Let's leave it at that for today.